Picture this. The sun rises over the Persian Gulf on the morning of April 28, 2026, casting golden light across waters that have suddenly become the most dangerous on Earth. Three massive nuclear-powered aircraft carriers slice through the waves, forming a triangle of American firepower so overwhelming that satellite imagery shared by Reuters shows Iranian patrol boats frozen at their docks, unable to move. The diplomatic phone lines between Washington and Tehran, once buzzing with frantic negotiations, have gone silent. The game is over before Iran even realized it was playing its final hand. Just hours ago, in an exclusive phone conversation reported by multiple sources, including CBS News and The Wall Street Journal, President Trump made a decision that sent shockwaves through every intelligence agency from Langley to Moscow. He unilaterally canceled the planned diplomatic mission that would have sent senior advisors to Pakistan for backdoor negotiations with Iranian representatives. The message was brutally simple. America is done talking. For days, Tehran had clung desperately to its position on the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow choke point through which nearly 1/5 of the world's oil passes daily. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, had drawn a red line they swore they would never compromise on. But as CNBC reported on April 27th, intelligence intercepts revealed something extraordinary. Panic was spreading through the IRGC command structure like wildfire. They had finally looked up from their maps and propaganda videos to see what was assembling just beyond their territorial waters. And what they saw made their blood run cold. An unprecedented concentration of American military might was tightening around Iran like a noose. 3 aircraft carriers, a deployment not seen in one theater since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, according to defense analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced warship ever built, holding station in the Red Sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln, a veteran of countless operations, dominating the Arabian Sea, and the USS George H.W. Bush, pushing up from the Indian Ocean to complete a deadly triangle that left Iran surrounded on all sides. Together, these floating fortresses carried more than 200 fifth-generation fighter jets, F-35Cs, and F/A-18 Super Hornets, each one capable of precision strikes that could take out Iranian military installations before Tehran even knew they were coming. But the carriers were just the tip of the spear. Accompanying them were 27 heavy warships, cruisers and destroyers, bristling with Aegis missile defense systems and Tomahawk cruise missiles. More than 15,000 fully equipped personnel, including the battle-hardened 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, were deployed across the region. ABC News military correspondent reported on April 29th that this represented the largest single-theater deployment of American naval power in over 2 decades. The message couldn't have been clearer if it had been written in fire across the sky. Iran's days of threatening global energy supplies were over. The regime in Tehran had been counting on its allies. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi had been urgently dispatched to Moscow on April 26th, his plane touching down in the Russian capital with a briefcase full of desperate proposals. According to sources cited by Reuters, Araghchi met with Foreign Minister Lavrov and other senior Russian officials, pleading for military support, advanced weapon systems, anything that could help Iran break the tightening American blockade. He returned to Tehran on April 27th with nothing but empty diplomatic pleasantries. Russia, bogged down in its own strategic challenges and carefully managing its complex relationship with Washington, had no intention of opening a direct confrontation with the United States Navy on behalf of a regime it increasingly viewed as a liability. The silence from Beijing was even more deafening. For years, China had been Iran's economic lifeline, purchasing an estimated 1.4 million barrels of Iranian oil per day at discounts of $8 to $10 below the Brent crude benchmark price, as documented in multiple Wall Street Journal investigations. This black market trade had kept hard currency flowing into Iranian coffers, despite international sanctions. But now, something extraordinary was happening. On April 28th, the Chinese Foreign Ministry issued an urgent advisory for all Chinese nationals to evacuate Iran immediately. Commercial flights were chartered, diplomats were pulled from their posts, and within 72 hours, according to CNBC reports, more than 4,000 Chinese citizens had fled the country. This wasn't just a travel warning. This was Beijing sending a crystal-clear message that it had written off the Iranian regime entirely. And the reason was simple. The United Arab Emirates had just announced, as reported by Bloomberg on April 25th, that it was completely lifting OPEC production limits and could supply China with all the oil it needed at competitive prices, with none of the sanctions risk or geopolitical complications. Why would China risk American sanctions, frozen assets, and international isolation to buy smuggled Iranian oil when it could purchase clean, legal Emirati crude with a simple phone call? The calculation took Beijing approximately 5 seconds to make. The American blockade of the Strait of Hormuz wasn't some blunt instrument of brute force. It was operating with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, combined with the crushing power of a sledgehammer. According to defense officials quoted by the Washington Post on April 29th, the operation involved cutting-edge technology that turned the entire Persian Gulf region into a monitored zone, where nothing could move without American knowledge and approval. Autonomous underwater vehicles, deployed from Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines, were conducting continuous minesweeping operations. Advanced sonar networks recorded and analyzed every acoustic signature in the region, capable of detecting Iranian submarines or unauthorized underwater activity with stunning accuracy. On the surface, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers had established a monitoring grid that tracked every vessel entering or leaving Iranian ports with millimeter-level precision. To date, 39 cargo ships and tankers had been turned back by American naval forces for deviating from approved routes or carrying suspicious cargo. The incident in the Arabian Sea on the morning of April 28th demonstrated just how seriously the United States was taking this operation. Special operations units from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit conducted a professional boarding and inspection of the commercial vessel MV Blue Star III, which had been exhibiting suspicious behavior, according to Reuters reporting. The ship was thoroughly searched, its cargo manifests examined, its communications reviewed. No violations were found, so it was allowed to proceed. But the message had been delivered. These waters were now under complete American control. The rules of engagement, as reported by CBS News citing Pentagon sources, were ruthlessly clear. Any threat to civilian shipping would be immediately neutralized. No warnings, no hesitation, no second chances. President Trump had personally stated in remarks to reporters on April 27th, "If Iran is putting mines in the water or otherwise threatening American commercial shipping or American forces, we will shoot to destroy. No hesitation." Those 3 words, no hesitation, were now the operational doctrine for every American commander in the region. Beneath the water's surface, an invisible technological war was being waged that Iran had no capability to counter. Virginia-class submarines, among the quietest and most advanced in the world, were conducting surveillance operations that mapped every inch of seabed where Iranian forces might attempt to lay mines or hide sabotage equipment. The IRGC's fleet of speedboats, once trumpeted in Iranian propaganda as a fearsome asymmetric threat capable of swarming American vessels, now sat idle at their bases. The commanders knew that the moment those boats ventured into open water, they would be tracked by satellite, monitored by Aegis radar systems, and could be obliterated by precision fire before they got within 10 miles of an American ship. The economic impact on Iran was catastrophic and accelerating by the hour. The Financial Times reported on April 28th that Iran was losing an estimated $400 to $600 million per day in blocked oil exports. Tankers that would normally be loading crude at Iranian ports sat empty. The oil that was being produced had nowhere to go, filling storage facilities to capacity. According to industry analysts cited by Bloomberg, Iran had been forced to shut down production at multiple wells because there was literally nowhere to put the oil they were pumping. The regime's foreign currency reserves, already depleted by years of sanctions, were evaporating. Unlock the full story right now by subscribing to John Doland Reports and hitting that notification bell. Because what happens next will determine whether we witness a regime surrender or the opening moves of a catastrophic military confrontation. Don't miss a single development as this crisis reaches its breaking point. Inside Iran, the regime was fracturing. The IRGC, humiliated by its inability to counter the American blockade and desperate to deflect blame, was moving to sideline the civilian government entirely. According to sources cited in a Wall Street Journal report from April 29th, fierce debates were erupting in the corridors of power in Tehran. Military hardliners were accusing diplomats of weakness and betrayal. Civilian officials were desperately trying to find some face-saving way out of the crisis before the economy completely collapsed. Rumors of dismissals and arrests swirled through the capital. The regime's National Security Commission had begun issuing public calls for war preparations. But intelligence analysts quoted by the Washington Post dismissed these as propaganda aimed at rallying the domestic population rather than serious military planning. The harsh reality was that Iran had no military cards left to play. Its air force was outdated and outmatched. Its navy was bottled up in port. Its missile forces, while extensive, would face immediate and overwhelming retaliation if fired. The asymmetric warfare tactics that Iran had relied on for decades, speedboat swarms, proxy militias, mine-laying, were all neutralized by American technological superiority. The public inside Iran was feeling the squeeze. Power outages were becoming more frequent as fuel supplies for generators ran low. Prices for basic foodstuffs were climbing daily. The Iranian rial, already weak, was in free fall according to currency tracking data reported by Reuters on April 30th. The government's attempts to manage the crisis, discount packages offered by the Ministry of Energy for citizens who reduced consumption, were transparent band-aids on a hemorrhaging wound. The regime's carefully cultivated image of strength and resistance was crumbling as ordinary Iranians watched American warships on the news and wondered why their government had led them to this precipice. The international community was watching with a mixture of anxiety and grim satisfaction. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, longtime rivals of Iran, were openly pleased. Protected by the American naval umbrella, they were confidently increasing their own oil production to fill the gap left by Iranian crude, as reported by Bloomberg Energy on April 29th. European nations, while publicly calling for diplomatic solutions, were privately relieved that someone was finally confronting Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional aggression head-on. Israel's defense establishment was on high alert, but quietly supportive, according to sources cited by the Jerusalem Post. Meanwhile, the Trump administration's position remained absolutely uncompromising. In his public statements and in leaked reports of private communications, the president's message never wavered. No nuclear weapons, number one. No extensions of previous agreements. No compromises on uranium enrichment. No wiggle room whatsoever. The Washington Post reported on April 28th that when Iranian intermediaries had attempted to propose various face-saving formulas, American negotiators had responded with a single-word answer that effectively ended the conversation. That word was no. The diplomatic schizophrenia on display from Tehran was almost surreal to watch. Officials would appear on Iranian state television delivering fiery speeches about resistance and retaliation, promising to close the Strait of Hormuz and rain missiles on American forces. Then, according to intelligence reports cited by the Wall Street Journal, those same officials would be sending desperate messages through back channels, seeking any possible compromise that might ease the pressure. This gap between public rhetoric and private panic was the clearest sign that the regime knew exactly how dire its situation had become. The Look East strategy that Iran had pursued for years, building closer ties with Russia and China to counterbalance Western pressure, had collapsed virtually overnight. Moscow's refusal to provide meaningful support was a body blow. Beijing's evacuation of its citizens and pivot toward Emirati oil was a death sentence for Iran's economic survival strategy. According to analysis published in Foreign Affairs magazine, Iran had fundamentally misread the international landscape. They had assumed that Russia and China would view them as a valuable strategic partner worth defending. Instead, both powers viewed Iran as a useful but ultimately expendable piece on the chessboard. And when the costs of supporting Tehran became too high, they walked away without a second thought. Even the cryptocurrency money laundering networks that Iran had developed to evade sanctions were crumbling. CNN Business reported on April 27th that Western intelligence agencies working with major cryptocurrency exchanges had identified and frozen digital wallets linked to Iranian entities, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. The regime's hopes of using blockchain technology to maintain access to international finance were proving as futile as everything else they had tried. Venezuela and Brazil, potential alternative buyers for Iranian oil, were instead moving in the opposite direction. The Wall Street Journal reported on April 26th that both countries were in discussions with American energy companies about increasing their own production and exports. The global energy map was being completely redrawn, and Iran was being erased from it entirely. The strategic calculations that had guided Iranian policy for decades were all proving catastrophically wrong. The regime had believed that Western democracies were weak and indecisive, that electoral pressures would prevent sustained military action, that America lacked the will to follow through on its threats. They had been convinced that if they could just buy enough time, enrich enough uranium, build enough regional influence through proxy forces, eventually the West would accept them as a nuclear power and accommodate their ambitions. Instead, they had miscalculated so badly that they now found themselves completely isolated, economically strangled, militarily impotent, and facing an American president who showed zero inclination to blink first. Every red line they had drawn had been crossed. Every demand they had made had been rejected. Every ally they had counted on had abandoned them. The regime now faced a choice between three equally terrible options. They could surrender, accepting American demands and dismantling their nuclear program in exchange for survival, a humiliation that might well trigger their overthrow by hardliners who had built entire careers on resistance to the West. They could escalate militarily, launching attacks on American forces or regional targets, which would almost certainly result in devastating retaliation that could destroy the regime entirely. Or they could continue as they were, slowly collapsing under the weight of economic isolation while pretending everything was fine, a path that led to the same destination as surrender, but with even more suffering along the way. None of these options offered anything resembling victory. The IRGC generals who had promised the Iranian people that they would never bow to American pressure now sat in their command bunkers, staring at maps that showed their coastline ringed by overwhelming force, their economy in freefall, and their allies fleeing. The theocratic system that had ruled Iran since 1979, 47 years of revolutionary rhetoric and anti-American defiance, was facing its moment of truth. Above them, F-35C fighters flew continuous combat air patrols. Below them, nuclear submarines prowled the depths. Around them, the Iron Ring tightened hour by hour. And from Washington came only silence and the steady deployment of more military power. The Trump administration had made its final offer, Iran had rejected it, and now the bill was coming due in full. The question that every analyst, every intelligence agency, every foreign ministry around the world was asking was simple. What happens next? How does a regime that has built its entire identity on resistance and defiance admit that it has been utterly, completely, comprehensively defeated? Can the IRGC swallow its pride and accept terms it has spent years calling unacceptable? Will hardliners within the regime prefer to go down fighting rather than surrender? Or will the whole rotten structure simply collapse from within as different factions turn on each other, seeking to blame anyone but themselves for the catastrophe? One thing was absolutely certain. The old Middle East, the one where Iran could threaten shipping lanes and build nuclear facilities and arm proxy militias, while the international community differed and debated, that Middle East was gone forever. A new order was being born in the waters of the Persian Gulf, enforced by American carrier strike groups and shaped by an administration that had decided the time for patience had expired. Tehran's last gasp had failed. The buffer zone they demanded did not materialize. The diplomatic escape hatch they sought had been welded shut. The allies they counted on had booked evacuation flights. The economic lifelines they needed had been severed. The military options they threatened had been neutralized before they could even be attempted. The revolutionary regime that had terrified the region for nearly half a century now stood alone, surrounded, and out of options. The game was over. Iran just hadn't accepted it yet. But acceptance or not, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The only question was how much more damage the regime would inflict on its own people before acknowledging what the entire world could already see clearly. They had lost. This is the moment that reshapes the global order and proves that no amount of revolutionary fervor can stand against overwhelming technological superiority, economic isolation, and the cold strategic calculation of a superpower that has decided enough is enough. Subscribe to John Doland Reports right now and smash that notification bell so you never miss our in-depth analysis as this historic crisis continues to unfold. Share your thoughts in the comments below about what you think Iran will do next. Thank you for choosing us to guide you through these world-changing events. We have reached the end of this video, but our analysis never stops. For those who want to absorb these detailed breakdowns during your commute or daily routine, follow John Doland Reports on Spotify through the link in the description below. And stay informed, no matter where you are or what you are doing.